Welcome to Decolonising Global Health, the podcast that invites you to learn with us as we explore what decolonisation means for our work in global health. In this podcast, we want to open up the conversation, challenge dominant narratives, and reimagine the future of global health. I'm your host, Cara Munn, and in each episode, I will dive deep into the conversations around decolonising the practices and power structures that shape global health today. The term decolonisation can be defined in many ways. We envisage a process of challenging Western superiority, the reversal of colonial legacies, and recognising pluralistic knowledge systems. Our guests will shed light on why decolonisation is crucial to achieving health equity and offer insights into how we can make it relevant for our audience, many of whom are working in the field of global health from Ireland. Join us as we question, learn and grow together, working towards a world where health is a right, not a privilege, and where every voice is heard and valued. Today, we are delighted to welcome Christian Acemah to the podcast. Christian is the Executive Director of the Uganda National Academy of Sciences and brings a wealth of expertise in international development, global health and governance. Throughout his career, Christian has worked at the intersection of large international institutions and their national counterparts, and has held roles in diverse organisations, including the US National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, in Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Lutheran World Federation. In today's episode, Christian will share his insights on decolonising global health partnerships, drawing from his extensive experience navigating these spaces. We're delighted to have you join us for this important conversation, Christian.
I am happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's always good to connect with my friends in Ireland.
Excellent. Thank you. Christian, to start us off, I'd like to hear your perspective on the topic of partnerships in global health.
Yes, my perspective of partnerships in global health has evolved steadily since my initial introduction to the whole idea in 2006. And then, of course, back then we were under the Millennium Development Goals, and in particular, the MDG 8, the partnership goal, which ended up being the orphan goal. Globally, we didn't really make that much progress with MDG 8. And then fast forward to 2015, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals. And the 17th one was inserted after a lot of argument and global consultations, well, as many as the General Assembly could have in the lead up to SDGs. So SDG 17, the partnerships one, again, struck me as that thing that would unite all of the 16 sustainable development goals. Without the partnerships, there would be no ending poverty. There would be no gender equity. There would be no taking care of our oceans in this warming globe of ours, our home. So now, when it comes to that partnership, I'd say it's a misused word these days, a lovely word, but misused word that it's as if it's a contractual relationship. One of the World Bank colleagues said, well, look at me at the World Bank. You come to me and say, I want a partnership, but you talk about money first. What is that? What are you really intending to do? So my view of partnership has evolved from that kind of rigid, minimalist stance on the contract to more thinking of a partnership as this trusting relationship which builds, which strengthens all of those that are involved in that which they want to call a partnership or a relationship. And in fact, the more I've used the word relationship, the more the whole concept of partnership has sunk into my heart, because it is the spirit and the letter of what you're doing, but the spirit most important.
Thank you for sharing that, Christian. I really like how you're viewing partnership as being this foundational concept upon which all the rest of our work in global health is built. And I would concur with you on that. It really is just so important. And that the evolution of it from this rigid structure, maybe with the rules involved, to looking at it as a trusting relationship, I think it makes it more accessible as well for us to understand and for us to make improvements and to understand that we need to actually put time into partnership the same we put time into any of our relationships.
Exactly.
Building on what you've said there, Christian, how has your experience working in the global health field informed your ideas about partnerships between so-called northern and southern institutions?
Uh-huh. And that's a real evolution as well. I started out as deep in the villages as an NGO official, very young and not that smart, although I thought I was, dealing with patients really with HIV and other sustainable STIs, sexually transmitted infections. So that was my first thing. And we had colleagues from Denmark, Norway, the United States who would pop in, visit us in Rakai, and then pop out. But whenever they popped in, they came with so many ideas. And they came with so many irrelevant drugs. But they felt so good about what they were doing. And in my heart, I didn't feel very good because I was perpetuating what I knew wasn't an appropriate use of time or resources because we had to spend time with them. And then we didn't really ever express to them what was happening on the ground and whether we thought what they were doing was relevant or not. We clapped and then saw them off. So I started there, then went into the bigger leagues, working at Gavi, and in there, I mean, Gavi back then was still part of UNICEF. So it was a double whammy, being an international public servant, but also working for this very wealthy organization, Gavi Alliance. So in there, I was able to, in my early 20s, pick up the phone and call any minister of health I wanted to speak with. And talking in the millions of dollars to do things wasn't an issue whatsoever. And and so back then we thought, yeah, we are doing things. It was, during the health as a traitor sector for the aid effectiveness principles and the Accra agenda for action. But I don't think I started any memo without quoting those two things, the Paris principles and the Accra action, Accra agenda after that. So yeah, that was really me flying high and thinking of Gavi as that global health partnership. That's where I was. And part of my work was to continue the thinking about private-public partnerships or public-private partnerships for global health, which Gavi still is, and the Global Fund back then, and GAIN, the Global Alliance for Nutrition. All of those were all in Geneva. And we used to get together to talk about what we meant by partnership. And by and large, what we meant was we give the money and technical advice. Then the countries involved, they receive the money and use it as we've agreed. Or if they don't use it as we've agreed, we start launching investigations into corruption. And there were so many scandals, including the uncomfortable one in my own country, where I had to brief the CEO. I had to talk about Uganda, being enthralled in corruption wrangles. So that was uncomfortable.
That really does sound like a difficult situation, Christian. Where else did you work that influenced your ideas about partnership?
Fast forward, then I'm in, at the National Academy of Medicine, back then Institute of Medicine, dealing with, several countries in Africa, and by and large working on now global health research, the consensus studies in global health, but other things as well connected to global health. And that's when I really saw that I personally could wreak a lot of havoc with the partners, you see, the organizations that we worked with, and started seeing some of the negative practices we had. For example, saying very clearly that we will not give you money unless you do what we want. But it wasn't said like that. It was said between the lines. The organizations had to figure out what we meant. And many times they would call me and say, what did your bosses mean when they said X? and I would have to interpret what they said. But on the other hand, I would have to also interpret in Washington what colleagues in these African countries meant. So this is what the Nigerians really meant. Or with the Ethiopian case, I didn't have to translate because the Ethiopians would simply say, no, we are not going to do it. If you want to do work on malaria, fine, another academy you're going to do it with, but not in Ethiopia. That is not our priority. We want to do biotechnology. And so it was one of those.
How wonderful is that,
Yes,
Christian, that the
yes,
Ethiopians were actually taking back their own power? Because what you're talking about here is just such power imbalances. And that
yes.
is, I suppose, the foundation of which is really the money.
Yep, the money. And I'll tell you, working very closely with the Ethiopian Academy of Sciences, because as now the liaison, taught me a lot. I would say it was an inflection point there in my understanding of partnerships, because I was there in Addis Ababa with a colleague to deliver a message from our boss saying what the Ethiopians should do with the money we're going to send them. And they took us to lunch. And then after lunch, the whole board was there. And they told us very politely, if for us here at the Ethiopian Academy, here are our priorities. And dealing with that issue in global health, the one you're talking about, I think it was vaccines, that is not a priority. And I remember thinking at the same time, how am I going to tell my boss the answer? But also being very happy. And my colleague with me, she turned red. She didn't know what to do. It was the first time one of our so-called partners was getting money from us and saying, well, if you want to take it away because we won't do what you want us to do, it's okay. And guess what? We briefed our boss, and within 2 hours, it was clear, support the Ethiopian Academy to do whatever it wants to do. And yes, we still gave even more money to the Ethiopians. I thought that is a stroke of genius. They were true. They held their principles. They knew what they were. And they lived in that light. And our final interaction with the Ethiopian Academy was to say, we still have, what was it, $50,000 for the Ethiopian Academy, but we can't send it to you unless you send us a proposal for a program you're going to run with this money. And we got a response back. Oh, we thank you. You've been great partners. We've worked with good colleagues, but we do not need the 50,000 anymore. Send it to another academy because our Prime Minister's office gave us $500,000. So we really have no use for the 50,000. Again, another moment, I was so happy. Those two things happened. They knew what they wanted at the academy, but then they also leaned on their internal relationships to get out of an uncomfortable situation. I was so proud in that moment of Ethiopians. I think it's the only academy that managed to do that during the whole 11 years of that partnership. So I love it in that way that what I've learned is you stick to your principles, be true to yourself. Eventually you run into those the organizations that actually want to walk the walk with you for all those involved again to grow. And that's where I am these days. I speak candidly with our founders. Some like it, others do not. But I really think that is the bedrock of the work going forward. If we who are in the global south, as we are told, don't act more like the people at the Ethiopian Academy, then we are not going to change anything. The status quo will say the onus is on us to start that change. And largely by saying, no, we are not going to engage on your terms anymore because we actually need each other.
That is such a difficult thing to do. But I do feel that this shift that you're describing to us here, Christian, is really timely. What I really would like to ask you about, Christian, is how your background affects these situations that you're describing. I know, for instance, that you are Western educated, but that you are from Uganda. How do you navigate this tension between your origins, your education, and these experiences that you're describing?
Well, it is a struggle, a daily struggle. I will tell you right from my undergraduate education, it took me learning about the foundations of Western knowledge to understand the value of the things that my grandparents, for example, tried to instill in me. And it wasn't until I was there starting out as a first year student studying the great books of Western civilization that I started noticing certain things, when, reading the Homeric poems, Iliad and Odyssey, and reminding myself of the way my grandparents and great-grandparents told stories. And they had a historical record of everything, and they would tell you that was a big source of wisdom. So in many ways, I embraced the Western tradition only to come back to my own and to reappreciate my own foundations, the African philosophies. And I don't know if I would have embraced what I call my Africanness, my Blackness, had I not gone to, where I went to school for undergraduate and graduate school. I don't think so, because I had to question many things when I was there. I mean, as an undergrad, I was the only Black person in our undergraduate program for 4 years. All my friends were white. All my teachers were white, except one of my mentors. She was Hispanic, but still American Hispanic, educated at Yale University. So more and more, I started thinking, even when I was out doing monitoring and evaluation, I started thinking, what do these metrics actually mean anything in Rakai? Do they mean anything in Kumasi in Ghana? Do they mean anything in Cambodia? And over time, I've really come to say that they mean very little, because you're only measuring what you think is important. And those measurements are grounded in, ideas of, say, statistics, ideas of what mathematics means, ideas of, this whole quantitative side of things that, many times takes away the context, the real, what gives people meaning in their lives, what makes, say, these partnerships important, what change they actually bring, because it's very easy and lazy to rely on quantitative data, the so-called objective data. You hear those words, objective data, and you do all these things in the statistics, you control for this, control for that. And I thought, this again, another mental colonization. Think that we have to measure, look at us in our context, evidence use in the way it is defined by a Western donor. And we've had to push back and say, that's actually, evidence that you're talking about might not matter to my policymaker. The idea that people are the experts of their own experiences, period. So whatever they want to fashion, they are the experts. Whether you see it as the same as them, but they are the experts of their own lives. And it changed the way I approached these ideas of evidence. It's a struggle every day, because I find myself lapsing back into that idea of, this number isn't accurate, or what you're getting out of this number. No, it's not. Then I have to catch myself and ask, well, why did you include this number? I would like to understand. So it's a struggle, though I don't always do well, but I do try. And I know that it's a source of strength and also a stumbling block.
Mm-hmm. It sounds, Christian, from what you've described to me, that you've taken on board it as a continuous learning for yourself, how you engage with different perspectives. And this moment when you understood this question of whose perspective is important sounds like it was really a key change for you. We discussed, I think, in the first episode of this podcast on how we hold those multiple perspectives as well, because even within one community, it's not just one perspective, is it, Christian? You will find there are just so many different perspectives. So it's not even just this bi-directional of a donor and a community, but much more perspectives to be considered. How do you find ways of holding multiple perspectives in the work that you do?
Well, again, that's a difficult one. And the donor's perspective, guess what? It's always the understood perspective. Everyone knows what it is. In there with our different stakeholders within the same community, what I try to do is make there to be an opportunity for everyone to speak, however little or however much they want. Since that is the kind of business I'm in, we're preparing neutral platform for people to say their piece and not feel like they're going to be crushed for it. And that is it. Making those opportunities, bring people. We've brought people in to talk from deep in the villages, to talk with the higher level policymakers. And guess what? They've been in the same room and they've found more common ground than they thought they would ever have. So being that facilitator, I think, helps hold those multiple perspectives and kind of bring them to interact with each other. And what occurs after that is just so beautiful, because you don't have one dominating. What you have as the dominant factor is a shared meaning, a shared learning with all those disparate views. So that's one way we have done it.
I love your approach to bringing everybody together and finding that shared perspective, and hopefully you're re-educating donors as you go. I've no doubt that you are, giving them new ways of looking at things as well. I want to maybe just switch a little bit to what you've already touched on it here, in fact, is how we can support locally driven priorities as an aspect of good partnership. And I think the reality is that global health partnerships are often initiated to address specific gaps. But despite good intentions, they can sometimes perpetuate dependence and sideline local priorities. So you've already spoken about a strategy that can maybe bring together all these different perspectives so that they can be better understood and find a common understanding in a particular situation. And I'm just wondering if you have any other strategies to strengthen the local capacities that can make it easier for sustainable, locally driven solutions to be brought forward.
You know, I think for me, I go back to the Ethiopian example, and it is one I use often in my dealings with policymakers and with funders, especially those who are within our continent or our country. I say, look, we are never, ever going to be in charge of our futures unless we invest towards that way of being in charge. The reality is, as long as you are getting your money from outside, money, it seems that money is the biggest source of power, the greatest source of power these days. And as long as your money is not making your priorities, that we'll be here talking for many more decades about dependence and how to reform the way donors act. And so I think for us is to reframe and say, how are we going to fund ourselves? And you know, in our countries, there's a lot of money. No one should ever lie about that. There's a lot of money, say in Uganda, roaming around, and those who have it, have it. Those who have access to it, have access to it. And say a fraction of that money could go a long way. See, let us say in our health system, a fraction of that money invested in a health system will go a long way. Because look, Uganda can afford its own immunization program. To fund it fully, it can afford its malaria control program. It can afford its own AIDS program. I mean, we even have a factory that makes these drugs, and one that is trying to expand and now become a vaccine manufacturer as well. It may take a few years, but it is there, and these business people are hell-bent on making it happen. The price of malaria drugs went down when we started manufacturing our own drug because there was competition locally. So for my policymakers, I always say, if you're not going to put money where your mouth is, we are not going to help each other. We are not going to help ourselves. So that is a winning strategy where you make your priorities and put your money there as well. The Ethiopians with their $500,000, could they have used more? Absolutely, but they chose not to. They say we are going to do things within our limits, within our national limits. As I say, that is a real winning one. That's one strategy. The other strategy is to actively look out for like-minded partners. They are there. They are very few, but they exist. And those can be referred to in the broad term of allies or accomplices. The whole idea of genuine allyship is say, yeah, we have other human beings that want to do right. They may be stuck in organizations that don't want to do right, but they want to do right. And they want to do good by us. Those are the few that will listen to your ideas and say, okay, that's what we are going to support. If that's what you say is important, we are going to support it. And guess what? You'll tell us whether it works or not. And if it doesn't work, we'll still be here with you to go and deal with the next priority. So that's two things, all our own financing and then genuine allyship. So working with people like you, Kara and other folks at IGHN, working with people at the African Visionary Fund, working with some of the people at the Hewlett Foundation.
These are some great strategies that you've described here.
Mm-hmm. But I want to talk about something different right now, Christian, because perhaps not all of our listeners will be aware, but last year, the Ugandan National Academy of Sciences had a very important publication about global health partnerships, and you served as the study director. So this study brought together a multidisciplinary expert committee and proposed a paradigm shift in how we approach partnership. Many of the report's recommendations focused on individual level change. So going even further, I would say, than maybe lots of the frameworks that we have had to date that look at characteristics of good partnerships. So some of these changes include adopting values such as humility, embracing diverse perspectives, and addressing defensiveness. I have to say, Christian, I've never heard that elsewhere in relation to partnerships. So for me, this already brought a different perspective that wasn't maybe so much in our Western viewpoint, but much broader. And all of these together imply, as global health professionals, that personal growth is essential to working more effectively and equitably. So what I want to ask you, Christian, is how can the global health field support individuals in this kind of personal development? And maybe perhaps what kind of role does organizational culture play in fostering and embedding these values?
Well, organizational culture, I think that is, you just hit the nail on the head. The kind of attitude the organization adopts towards, say, its funding or its program implementation, or how it is going to market itself, to external partners, that it matters so much. So if the attitude within the organization is that we want, as people who work in here, to have a close, even a familiar relationship, and we are family. We all of us family in the good times, in the bad times, and in the bland times, we are together. That should never be a question. It's where we start. Those organizations, and I've seen them, they are always challenging themselves to learn and challenging themselves to get out of comfortable situations so that they can really engage with the human spirit or with those actors inside. That kind of attitude, that example with the familiar attitude, if it is in the organization, it will spread through to all, everything the organization touches. And the people within it will be challenged to grow in the same way. And like it or not, the people we call our leaders in the organizations, they set the tone of that culture. So if I've worked for a boss who thrived on being divisive, he loved it so much. It was the source of his power. And it was so toxic all the way from him to down, even his direct report started acting the same way. And so now you see, there was no personal growth. There was a kind of hijacking of personal growth so that everyone could please that divisive leader. Fast forward, the same organization has a very new leader, a new leader that has a different approach. And slowly but surely we see the change of attitude even in the kinds of emails that we receive from that organization these days. They have changed from just barking orders at us to actually wanting to be more consultative. So within those institutions, the people who are picked to be their heads, the senior team, those people, they set the tone very much. And I think personal growth starts with them embracing the reality that they don't have to be perfect all the time. They don't have to be right all the time. And they do not have to throw around their weight to be relevant.
What I'm hearing from you, Christian, is that leaders who challenge themselves to learn and grow can lead an organization to do likewise, and this benefits their partnerships. How about getting comfortable with discomfort? Would you say that this is a feature of such leadership?
That is very true. And I've evolved as a leader over time to where I can say, hey, look, people, I have really messed up in this regard. Please help me. Give me some advice, some guidance on how to get out of this negative situation that I have created. I've seen over time that with my colleagues, many of whom I've worked with for now over 10 years, I've seen with them that, they will be ready to go again through moments, uncomfortable moments with me, because I've been able to say, hey, I screwed up, or able to say, you screwed up, it's not the end of the world, here is how we're going to solve it. Or for something that we can't solve, you say, let's have ideas of where we can go for further guidance. And that's how we've worked through things. Again, the constant learning. I used to think my mom in particular was deluded when she said, look, as you grow older, you'll figure out what is worth fighting for and what isn't. And some of these things you think are important will in fact look very petty. Over time, her words have become more and more true. And a petty thing to hold on to is an idea that once you've done wrong, there's no coming back to it, from it. So challenge that idea head on leads to a lot of maturity within an organization, for the organization itself and for the individual actors with it.
Mm-hmm. Christian, you've described to us so much in this podcast today, everything from your own personal evolution to how that evolution can take place within an organization. We've touched on so many different themes and areas that relate to decolonizing global health, everything from the wisdom of grandparents to messing up and being forgiven. It's all been in here, Christian. And I'm just wondering, as we're coming to the end of this podcast now, I would like to hear from you if you have any final thoughts or takeaways for us and our listeners on how we can practice decolonization in global health partnerships.
Well, I think there is an exercise worth following, and to ask, say, if you are in a position of power, is to ask, what would happen if these other actors were not here? So let us do it, say, from our side at UNAS. What would happen if we didn't have all these donors from outside Africa? And going through that process, will you just fold? Or will you really work hard, make sure you stay afloat, and maybe even do better? that's an exercise I go through with my colleagues maybe twice a year. So we can plan accordingly and say, supposing something happens here, this scenario, what happens? On the other side, we talked with one of our funders and said, why don't you try to think about a time when we don't exist? How are you going to be relevant? Are you going to conjure up needs somewhere? For sure. Your source of power right now will no longer be a source of power. So what are you going to do to evolve so you stay in the mix and you do what you say you want to do good in the world without holding your money as the bargaining chip? And the funder appreciated that perspective because he thought, well, we'll always have money and money will be the thing that our partners run towards. So I said, no, change it. They are not running towards your money. What are you going to do? Because right now, the funders, the way they are set up, the way I look at their report card, if you're not spending money, investing it elsewhere, you're not doing your job. So those funders who hold on to money, I say you are failing because it means you are not working hard enough to find partners that are worth your while. So that will be my final word. Just that experiment is a humbling one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic exercise, Christian, to also just examine your relevance, your motivation, your strategy, so many different practical areas going forward. So I hope that will be of great interest to our listeners here today. Thank you so much, Christian, for joining us on this podcast. It has been incredibly insightful and enjoyable to chat with you here today. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks very much, Kara, and all those at IGHN and the listeners. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to reflect. Because typically we are going so fast, don't have time to pause and, again, discern the way forward.
Christian contributed to our Equity in Action blog last year with a piece entitled Of Legacies in Practice of Global Health Partnerships. He also addressed the audience as the keynote speaker at the IGHN conference in 2024. The blog and the conference recording is available on the IGHN website and in the podcast notes. Thank you everyone for joining us on this episode of Decolonising Global Health. We hope you found today's discussion thought-provoking and inspiring. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue these vital conversations. If you are enjoying this series, make sure to listen to our podcast series, Better Health for a Better World, in which we discuss a wide range of global health topics and explore global health projects and initiatives in the Global South. Listen on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected with us on social media for additional resources and more information about our guests and topics. Together, we can drive the change we wish to see in global health.